to part B of episode 2 of the Schizophreniforms Podcast with me, Dr. B or David Bradley, or the Schizophreniforms, and Mr. Paul Weeden on the right there.
Hello.
Hello. So what we're going to be doing in part B is I've got some things that I would like to discuss about my spiritual revelations in relation to psychosis, schizophrenia, and the correlations between that. And so how should we start this? I'll give a bit of background. So I'm registered disabled. I'm schizophrenic. I experience vivid hallucinations of partially demonic nature, partly angelic nature, loads of really quite surreal experiences, as you may or may not know if you've seen the first episode, sorry. And so the basic gist of what I wanted to discuss is to do with the correlation and distinction between the psychotic experience and the experience of mystics, shamans, and Buddhists and other spiritual practitioners. So, I would like you to ask me some questions, Mr. Paolo.
Okay.
Based on that.
So, when did you have your first experience of that nature?
Okay, so the first time I guess the first time I hallucinated was probably about 5 or 6 years old. I used to have quite nightmarish visions of demons and ghosts and monsters in my room, but it never really stopped. It progressed consistently throughout my life, and it became to the point where I just thought that was normal, but that no one talked about it. I thought it was like a bit of like a cult secret, like it was this underground knowledge that everyone had, and only certain people knew about it, and then that exacerbated my attachment to it. But then, sorry, go on.
So how did you find out that it wasn't?
So I won't go into too much detail about that, but like I made a suicide attempt using SSRIs, and I found that when I woke up when I recovered in hospital, this visionary state that had become normalized and sort of background in my experience had become much more vivid, and like I saw spirits now, and I'd seen and I started to see things like that could best be described as like apparitions or like visions of silhouettes of things. And I also had, after I awoke from this sort of like bizarre state I put myself in by taking an overdose of SSRIs, I had the ability...
Sorry, could you just clarify what that stands for people that don't know?
Oh, cool, yeah. SSRIs is a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor, and it's used as an antidepressant, examples of which would be citalopram, sertraline, and fluoxetine.
They quite common psychotropic, medication, really, isn't it? Actually.
Yeah, the reason I was on it was because, like, from the age of about 15, I was diagnosed with severe clinical depression, and I'd already tried to commit suicide using SSRIs prior to this, which I think probably exacerbated the situation, and is the reason that it continued over a number of years to become more and more vivid. But then on the occasion when I did that in the past, that was with fluoxetine, and I made myself vomit so that I had very little of it in my system. That wasn't the question you asked, though. You were saying... sorry, what was the question?
I was just saying that they're actually very very commonly used medication on people acquire through the NHS all the time.
Yeah, and they're perfectly safe. It's just that I was a particularly severely depressed person. It's not uncommon for older SSRIs to actually, and it's still the case with some, but less so with things like citalopram, which is very good at controlling anxiety and is also an antidepressant. You get less of this because when you first start taking SSRIs, people are more prone, and there's some debate as to whether that's because that more prone to suicidal attempts, basically, more prone to extremely negative thoughts. And there's some debate as to whether that's the drug or whether it's just because they've been given that crutch and it's not yet actually taking effect in their system, thus they don't have the mental resilience that they did have to the feelings they were having or the emotions they were having.
Yeah, I think as a short-term, interest or prop really, or crutch, whatever you want to use, like I think it can be quite useful, can't it? But I think the problem is
I'm strongly against long-term SSRI use, just because like it
can
damage your brain, it can damage your ability to cope with emotions that you're normally meant to deal with. Like.
Exactly, we're meant to feel our emotions when they're telling us something. It's a question of working out what that is and going in that direction of solving that problem, if you like.
Yeah.
So just
quite often it's like when you put a plaster on a wound and you leave it on for too long, and then the wound gets infected because it's too moist. Like, similar to that. Well, I will say with SSRIs is like, and depression in general, I found what I was taught when I was first having therapy at the age of about 15, through neurolinguistic programming and cognitive behavioural therapy. There's this concept that, in my mind, this is how I kind of see it. Like, there's a certain time where you're reacting legitimately to appropriate stimuli, and thus you feel depressed. And sometimes people try to medicate that away rather than deal with the issue because it's too unbearable. There's other times, and there's other times where it's a biochemical thing, a neuropharmacological issue. But there's other times as well where, like, depression can be a matter of obsessive thoughts and badly programmed thought processes. So, like, so, like, for example,
like a recording of it going over and over again or something.
Yeah, it's almost like a stuck record, but until you become conscious of your internal dialogue and the narrative that you're having with yourself, and then start to subvert that or alter it, it can be like OCD. It can be an obsessive thought process that's not it's not even necessarily that you're genuinely depressed. It's just that you've fallen into a habit or a behaviour pattern of thought.
It's familiar.
Yeah, and it can be very comforting to feel depressed. It can be very
well, if it's what you know, and then not feeling depressed would feel uncomfortable, wouldn't it? Or could become like that. And
well, it would seem alien to feel normal, and then you would reject it, and then not only would your mind trigger those thoughts again to bring you back to that safe common ground that you understand, but also, like, you get what's it called, neuropeptides or something. Your body triggers the mental process because it's looking for these peptides to be released that make you feel depressed.
And also,
it's
it's
biofeedback loop.
Yes, it's like a confirmation bias. Like, it will also tell you to not do things that would help you feel better, like go to the pub with your mates or get into playing football again or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And people will tend to go with that, and often others around you will encourage you to do that and say things like, oh yeah, if you don't feel like it today, best not bother then. And that kind of thing can actually, I think, keep things more locked in for longer.
Well, I think that's a careful balance, because with some people, like, knowing that it is a problem and they can get treatment and that it is a clinical issue can be, well, like, for example, with schizophrenia, for example, then, like, when I was first diagnosed with it formally, so I obviously had it for ages, and I started to get the inkling that I had it, and I suffered from a lot of dissociation and schizophrenic type experiences and hallucinations, but I didn't know they were hallucinations. But I started to read the profile of a schizophrenic as being a list of things I could get away with at some unconscious level. Like, because, for example, I've always struggled with personal hygiene and self-maintenance. Just like tidying up the house, or like washing and cleaning, and like just basic, like, living day-to-day things that everyone has to do. And, like, that was characterized by my depression. But then with schizophrenics, like, some of the more severe ones, and the ones you tend to hear about, and the ones that are more popularly known, they're characterized by things like coffee eating, or smoking 80 fags a day, or having extreme rage attacks, or like having extreme panic attacks, or having extreme inability to navigate or manage their own self-maintenance and stuff like that. And so it gave me a justification for things that I already did, but like similar to what you were saying, like if I didn't have that justification of, oh, that's a characteristic of schizophrenia, I wouldn't necessarily. Do you see what I mean?
But it gives permission again, doesn't it, to be that, and
It
to
validates it, yeah.
and you know, I mean, if we look at it, if I was to like talk about it in terms of like the drama triangle, so you've got persecutor on one corner, victim on the other, and rescuer on the other, and
Is this to do with big mind or anything like that, or is it just
it's transactional analysis. It's a very simple sort of model for looking at how we engage with the world and the problems we face in a very simple model. I mean, you know, we move around them all, and they have a plus and a negative, so they can be like, you know, persecutor can be like potent and have like, you know, authority and power, and also it can be obviously abusive and, you know, hostile and things like that. And but also, so people, you know, who we often find ourselves in situations where we feel vulnerable, we feel like a victim, and victim can be a very comfortable place because it's passive. And
there's no guilt attributed with being a victim.
There's no guilt generally. I mean, there can be in some cases, but generally we would associate it as passive, like powerless. So we tend to then get a certain amount of like positive reinforcement from others, like sympathy, for example, or you know, and it's a really great place to be, like some of the time, absolutely. Like, and sometimes you need to be there to kind of process something, maybe, or to like kind of just feel those feelings and be kind of childlike. Maybe to heal, to, you know, held in some way by someone or some organisation, perhaps. But ultimately,
then after what it was like we were talking about in the previous half of the episode, like when you get a certain crutch, when you get a certain support that validates a set of behaviour, you then think that you're entitled to that, or that you
can't change
the
it.
Normal. You
know, I mean, you know, in any moment you can actually temporarily change your state by just kind of choosing to be something different for a few seconds. I think we can all do that at least some of the time, and it's kind of holding on to it, like that's the difficult bit. But I think part of it is practice and saying, like, today I'm not going to play that game, I'm going to play a different game, which is where I'm actually going to act like somebody who doesn't feel like this in this situation and just does something completely differently, and I'm just going to do that.
Relate to that strongly through mindfulness and like being self-observatory, and to see what, because like I find like with my mindfulness practice, and especially because I've had issues with dissociative identity disorder type experiences and dissociation and depersonalization, and I find that in situations like you were describing, like I tend to almost be acting out like a parody of my genuine emotion, and it is like there's a disjoint between. Does that make? Do you see?
Yeah, like a memory emotion. I think it's
like a reflective. Yeah. A reflection of like how I think I should be feeling, so I act like that.
You know how you felt then as well. Like, you know, that's how I felt then. This is how I feel. So I feel the same now. Perhaps in a way, and it's like, do you really? Like, do you have to feel that? You know?
Well, with the depersonalization and derealization, I've had moments where like a particular altered state or trauma state has returned, and it almost feels like I've travelled through time between one awakening as that personality to an awakening as that personality again.
Because it's so powerful, isn't it? It's such a potent. It can be so lucid. But nonetheless, it's still a bit like an illusion, like a sort of a magic trick in a way, isn't it? The mind plays out this game of like pulling us into a story, which is, this is how it is again. Not really. It just feels like that.
There are positive versions of that. Like I've, sorry to bring in drugs to it, but like I've had ketamine experiences where like, cause I fully admit to taking drugs. Like I'm not using drugs now, but in the past I've used plenty of drugs. Sorry, but like
sorry. Just say what you want to say.
So I've used ketamine in the past, and then I've found this profound, deeper connection to what I perceive to be the astral realm, and like what I would describe if I was from the perspective of belief, what I would describe as Christ consciousness, or how I've heard that described in scripture or in mystical journals, or like things that and it's a similar thing. Like I've found myself jumping from being Christ to Christ. So there's a polarity there as well. It's like similarly to with the NLP being or CBT being a manipulation of the mechanics that work behind obsessive compulsive disorder, and autosuggestion and hypnosis and stuff like that. Like these kind of positive affirmatory states that give you a higher sense of connection also can help bridge the gap and help make jumps as well. So if we can at this point, if move to the brief I sent, and just like if you've got any questions about things like that.
Well, yes, I mean, I was going to say, you know, I mean, maybe it's possible that if medication can, you know, obviously enhance or suppress emotional states, maybe it can do a lot more than that. And maybe whether, you know, I mean, if we weren't living in a sort of modern society, then, you know, we would be living in, in the trees essentially again, perhaps, and like using nature much more in a much more direct kind of experience way. That's like our ancestors did. So what do you think, what impact do you think that would have on mental health, and you know, how would you, if you didn't have access to citalopram, for example, and that just hadn't been invented for whatever reason, so how would you use nature to help you, do you think, David?
How would I use nature to help me? That's a very interesting question. So one of the things that I've always found useful is that, do you know the word numinous?
No.
It's basically like a secular version, or like a secular equivalent to Zazen or enlightenment. It's like, okay. Or like sudden realization of awe in nature. And that for me has been a constantly balancing factor. Like, so yeah, I guess if I hadn't been, so like, for example, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but like the reason I was on the citalopram and the fluoxetine before that was because of the horribly violent upbringing, being violently bullied at school, and in having issues at home, and very tense living environment where, like, had we not been under the social pressures of like quite a difficult situation in my family life and in school as well, if I hadn't been exposed to this sort of quite militant, quite unpleasant, as it was more so in the past, but like this sort of like very competition oriented, very aggressive environment of like primary schools and high schools that you tend to get, because one of the things that triggered my depression, because I didn't actually finish high school. I dropped out when I think I was like 15, and it was because I came out as bisexual, and people didn't accept that. Like there was someone who came out as gay in my school, and they knew who he was because he was gay, so they could create cultural identity and create a social reflection of what that meant to them, so they would knew where they were. But with something like bisexuality, or as I now consider myself, demisexuality, is like you're not afflicted by gender. It's not relevant. It's you want to make love to people that you love, more or less. And like when I came out as bisexual, like the bullying got a hell of a lot worse, and that's what led to depression. And like, sorry, I know it's a bit dark, but when I was like 15, there was a long period where I was drinking like a liter of vodka, 4 cans of beer, smoking an insane amount of weed, like daily, like, and that was as a reaction to this non-acceptance in the school environment, and that later informed my opinion of various other things. But so not having that like unaccepting way, not having that system in place that leads to difference being an unpleasant thing, or something that is worth eradicating, like we have in a lot of modern systems of society, I think I'd probably be entirely different. Like, for example, with my schizophrenic experiences, like, I think I had the kind, like, I don't know, yeah. So, in my perception, I died and went to hell when I did that suicide attempt. And so, like, I genuinely perceived that I had entered another reality, and that's quite common. If you look at like Norse mysticism and like quite a lot of different shamanic cultures around the world, and like early religious cultures, that's where you start in your spiritual development. You go down and then you grow up. Like you start off in HEL, in like rather than hell, but HEL, like the birthing ground where you learn the strength and abilities and psychical powers and strengths that then guide you through to reintegrate your psyche. Yeah, so I think that's like modern society in the Western world, and like I think there's benefits to it, sure, because like if I didn't have the medication, I would be in that hell probably still, you know, like at least I can block it out. But
or maybe you would have found, you know, if in another reality where you had an abundance of plants and nature around you, would you perhaps have found another, you know, way of healing maybe?
yeah, I mean, like there's arguments, like for example, I've heard of tribal shamans denouncing a newborn baby as a demon, like, and that's not just propaganda type thing. It's like, and that baby being killed or rejected from society or gotten rid of, or like, and that's not the sort of thing that I didn't at least think when I was in that state. Like I would look at people and I would see their ego, and I would see like a secondary face over their face, and I would perceive that as a demon. But then I would also be able to see their soul as an individual characteristic of their psyche as well. And like, I think, yeah, there's merits to both systems, because as it stands, like other than like quite extreme social anxiety and hallucinations, like I'm relatively normal. Like I'm not delusional. I'm not caught in flights of fantasy. I'm not in and out of the spirit world. I'm present in my body, which prior to that I wasn't.
Yes. That's, yeah, okay, all right. Yeah, I mean, I guess what you're saying is, you know, the extreme of anything isn't particularly helpful, but perhaps if there was, you know, sort of like,
I definitely think there's lessons to be learned from tribal cultures and shamanic indigenous practices.
Perhaps if natural psychedelics were used responsibly and we learned to understand them and to use them in a very mature and intelligent way in modern society, perhaps that would be really beneficial, is my point.
I would wholeheartedly agree with that, and one of the reasons I came out of my severe state of psychosis, one of the reasons because like a lot of people that I've worked with through mental health professionals and stuff said that I have a unique insight and a unique ability to, which I attribute to cognitive dissonance. I'm able to like perceive that I'm psychic or that I'm a shaman, and also perceive that I'm schizophrenic and that it's false impressions. And I'm able to hold both those things in my mind, whereas like a lot of people with schizophrenia tend to either be absorbed in it or over-medicated and thus unable to... they throw the baby out with the bathwater, or they're completely delusional. And like that's something quite unique about me. And it was LSD that helped me, LSD and magic mushrooms, that helped me reintegrate hallucinations as a positive thing. I talked about that in the previous video, actually.
Right. Yeah, it's really, I mean, it's a really fascinating and also, you know, disturbing at times kind of discussion, really, topic. Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about a film I watched. I think it might even be BBC, but it was like about the myth of psychiatry, I think it was called, and it sort of talks about all these experiments where people, you know, sort of presented as having certain traits, and you know, convinced various psychiatry institutions to kind of section them essentially, like and hold them against their will, and they were all made up, and you know, I just find the implications of that quite.
Well, like personally, my my sanity and development. I'm standing on the shoulders of perhaps even a century of people being horribly abused to get to the point where my medication exists. You know, and I do feel that, like, as a that's a horrible thing that had to happen for me to be able to have these meds. Like, but they work brilliantly. But like things like electroshock therapy that still happen sometimes, I find a bit brutal and stuff like that.
So, what do you want to experience now in terms of extrasensory experience?
Okay, so like in my mind, like if I'm completely honest about, like if I just say this is what I experience without translating it through psychiatrical terms or psychotherapeutic terms or trying to be rational or like grounded, I'm psychic. Like I feel visual, I see visual interpretations of people's emotional states. I see and feel their emotions reflected onto me, and I get there's some neuroscience behind that, where you have like what's it called, mirror neurons that make your body and brain react as though they're experiencing the emotion of the other person. But I have a particularly heightened state of that. Whether that's accurate information or not, I don't know. But like my extrasensory perception is that I am telepathic. And
well, have you ever like tested it, like with anything that you could actually record, and you've ever done that?
I've used quantification with the people that I'm having those experiences, and a lot of people tell me either that I'm psychic or I'm not psychic. And it's more often that they think that I'm like a hypnotist or a charlatan or like I'm quite often accused of cold reading, which I do know how to do. I'm very capable of that. Like I'm fully aware of the other kind of methodologies that can make these things happen. But like we were talking about tarot reading in the other section, like for example with the tarot reading, like I can read out of the book, but my interpretations of what's going on and how I integrate that and the methods I use to... So, like, I might use cold reading to open up the conversation to give them the impression that I have psychic impressions, which then gives them a reflection that that there's something mystical going on, which gives me the opportunity to then use what I perceive to be my psychic powers legitimately, because it's been framed in such a way that they don't think anything psychic is going on. So it's almost like I'm fooling them into not thinking that I've not got psychic impressions, and then that it makes it possible to divine information for them, or to see into their soul, or to see into their psyche in a way that, because like for example, like say if someone said I'm psychic and I can read your mind, that would freak you out and you wouldn't want to experience that. But if I said loads of stuff that was insightful and then said I was cold reading, they think that then you are cold reading when you're doing the actual psychic processes. So it gives a bit of
to me I would just say it's interpreting information.
Well, when I say psychic, that I just sort of clarify that actually quick, because you've hit a nail on the head there. Like my understanding of my psychic experiences are that these are things that everyone experiences at some level, but it requires drawing their focus towards that part of their experience before they are able to notice it's there. Whereas for me, it's more, I've got like this visual and psychosomatic auditory hallucination type filter that shows me that stuff at the conscious level all the time.
Okay.
And it's not. I don't think it's like paranormal phenomena, but like psychic's the best way to describe it, I guess.
Okay, so you are really saying then, aren't you, that you can. There are different ways of looking at a mental health issue, really, aren't there? And there could be a benefit to it. That it could be that the way we interpret it in our society isn't entirely the whole picture. That's if we can let go of some control over it to some extent, and also accept it and look at how to make use of a learning from it, then maybe that would be a really powerful way of being for the future, perhaps.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people in first first reaction, like the first people you see when you're in mental health when you've got severe mental health issues like psychosis or schizophrenia, those first response people, that's the one, first response people, tend to be very open-minded about that sort of thing. And it's not just a therapeutic illusion. It's like they see these things so consistently that they find it hard themselves to deny that there could be some element of mystical or...
They experience it themselves. And,
yeah.
At the time. So, yeah.
So the one thing I wanted to touch on in what I emailed to you was talking about the visionary state and the psychotic state, and solipsism versus universal oneness. You see that point? So I call myself schizophrenic, not psychic. And that's because that's a grounding influence for me, but also because I'm debilitated by the experiences I have, if you see what I mean. But what makes me different from a more severe, like a paranoid schizophrenic, or someone who's like permanently incarcerated, is this solipsism versus universal oneness concept. And there's this guy called Baba Ram Das who said that, like, he was interviewing a schizophrenic patient in a mental institute, and he was saying to the basic conversation, I paraphrase, but the conversation basically consisted of the schizophrenic person saying that I am God, and the mystic Baba Ram Das said that, can't you see that we're all that? And then the schizophrenic person said, no, you don't understand, obviously you don't understand. And he said, that's why you're in hospital and why I'm the mystic. And I think that's a very key thing that I wanted to touch on in this little bit of an interview sort of thing, was that belief that you're the only one with these powers, or belief that you're the only one with these perceptions, or any kind of solipsism whatsoever, where you think that you're either special or insignificant or powerful or weak because of these perceptions that, like, everyone is able to experience.
It's a paranoid schizoid position, isn't it? It's the person who says that they're God but no one else is. It's just sort of an intense narcissism, isn't it? Really.
Yeah, well, it's a combination of narcissism and abject terror. Because if you thought that everyone in the world was deity and had your power, when you felt so powerful and extremely empowered and, like, almost deified by your experience, which is, I can testify from my own experience and talking to other schizophrenic people, you feel like you are God or Jesus or the devil or any other character that has these extreme powers of paranormal or supernatural phenomena. And to think that anyone else could do that is almost inconceivable, because it would be so scary to think that the whole world was like that. So it's not just narcissism; it's also fear. Narcissism is bred from fear.
But being able to bear, any sort of power, really, or impact from others as well, I suppose, is what we're also talking about. Yeah.
Because that's what I find with, like, my perception that I experience psychic phenomena is, like, one of the reasons I take my meds is so that I don't have the strength to use them, or that I don't have the focus or the inclination or the desire to use them, because power corrupts, and for example, let me know when you need to wrap it up, by the way. But
I'm curious about what you're going to say next, but if we could have sort of in the next sort of like 5 or 10 minutes.
Okay. So with these psychic abilities, like I've had things where, like, I've sent a tendril out that I've visualized, and it's not just visualized, like, I actively see it, a tendril of my own energy coming from my chest, and then being able to literally tap someone 2 streets away on the shoulder and they look around immediately, or like being able to visualize or think words in my head and then have them come out of other people's mouths instantaneously straight away. And it's not an auto-suggestive process. It's literally
there are real projects, serious projects around the world that do use these techniques, like remote viewing. Have you seen like, you must have seen Men Who Stare at Goats? And do you know about Robert Monroe? Monroe Institute in somewhere in the States. I'm going to send you a link on that, because I think you'd really enjoy this guy's whole work. It's been around experiments with.
I know Rupert Sheldrake does quite a lot of interesting stuff to do with teleperception and stuff like that. Yeah. So but Robert Monroe, I think he used to work for NASA, and
basically all his like research, all his projects have been around like sort of verifiable experiments.
I think I saw a TED talk about him actually, where he was talking about remote viewing for I can't remember, not CIA, but it was someone like that. Some.
Yeah. Also, I think you'll find his work really interesting and verifying.
Some of my perceptions. Yeah. But I guess, like I was saying, like part of the reason I take the medication is so that I don't have the burden of responsibility of using these abilities, because I find that they limit not only my ability to do these things, but my desire to do them, because my focus is elsewhere, you know. But yeah, one last point, and then I'll go.
That's really about grounding, I think. Is like a really good point there. Is like if we're not balanced and aligned, then our ground, we're more likely to be really up in the air and really all just out on some psychedelic experience that's maybe interesting, but it's not particularly grounded. So
or productive because it's not grounded.
It could be risky then, you know.
Yeah. Well, I got accused repeatedly of delusions of grandeur in the early stage of my psychosis, because I genuinely thought I had God power rather than just like. And then I discovered that these phenomena are available to everyone. So we kind of covered quite a lot of what I wanted to talk about. So there was one last thing that I wanted to touch on, and then I will let you go.
Okay.
So the shamanic initiations, and then psychotic episodes, or the acute episodes of psychosis, or bipolar disorder, or like psychotic breaks where people start to have divine revelation or spiritual emergency, which are all legitimate things in psychology, but with shamanic initiation, it seems very remarkably similar to that. And I often struggle with this concept behind, like, I feel like I've been initiated as a shaman by some sort of exterior or interior force that has destroyed my psyche and then left me with these abilities as I healed myself. And whether they're real or not, the parallels between my mental health issues and this shamanic initiation process are hard to ignore. No, I just wanted to say that as like a final passing thing.
And just off the back of that, I would just say, you know, if you look at there's some really good work by a guy called Tony Parsons, not the actor, not the writer, sorry. And, you know, he really talks about how there is no, you know, if you look at things in terms of like non-duality, there is no like sort of hard fixed self.
Sure, yeah. You see a lot of that in neuroscience as well. There's
very fluid, really, and constantly changing. Like the you are today is not the same one who when you were 15 or something like that. And it's a variation on it. It's been molded a bit more and refined a bit more, or less in some cases. And but so, yeah, I think, you know, I think if we sort of believe that we're a fixed object, that's in a way that sort of makes, I think, sort of mental illness or challenges around mental illness much harder, because we've got this fixed idea that I'm not me anymore, and it's like, well, guess what? You never were anyway. You just responding to people's feedback and, you know, people's influence on you essentially over however old you are. And, you know, that can change all the time, and is, whether you like it or not.
There was one thing in the previous episode where I was talking to Martin, or Mercurialize, and we were discussing the idea that, like, static or like finites or universals in psychology in society itself can cause stagnation. And actually, like you were just saying, like it's like a global sickness, is that inability to progress or roll with the changes or accept the impermanence of nature. Stuff like that. Right. I'm going to go.
I'll send you this thing on Tony, because I think you'll find that really interesting as well. It's just really cool. Some of his work. So good stuff. I hope you've enjoyed that, David. Thank you for.
I did. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about myself. I appreciate the interest.
Well done for making the effort and putting it out there. It's very good.
Indeed, and I shall send you a link when it's done. So say goodbye.
Yeah. All right, take care. See you soon, David. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.